Hey everybody, it's Amy. So in this video, I'm going to go through the basics of WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. The presentation I'm giving today is based on some slides from previous workshops and like staff trainings that I've done. And it just helps break the WCAG guidelines down into fundamentals. There's a lot to the guidelines and they can be pretty overwhelming if you just go try to read them from top to bottom. So I'm going to break down how they're organized and some information about the conformance levels and sort of also the some easy checks for accessibility. So I'm going to share my screen and go through the slides, and the slides are also available for you to check out afterwards. All right, so like I said, I'm going to go through the background on the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. They are extremely useful, especially if you are, working with vendors. They're pretty much like the universal standard around web accessibility. And if you're going to be doing accessibility for websites or digital products, they're the gold standard guide. Also just talk about how they're organized and then go through, like I said, some easy checks for accessibility. So what is WCAG? Basically, it is a vocabulary. It gives you a framework for talking about accessibility that is easily referenceable, familiar. So just gets everyone on the same page about how we're talking about different parts of digital products and websites that we're making accessible. It's also a reference for people to, if you do find problems, how to fix problems, how to identify barriers. So it serves that purpose. It is in an outline structure. So when you go into the standard documentation, you'll see like section 1, section 1.1, 1.1.2. So you can kind of drill down into different parts and then come back out. So if you're just looking at, say, for example, media alternatives, you can just go into that particular section of WCAG and drill down into it. So it's organized in that outline fashion. It will also give you insights. I use Cite-Improve an example here. Cite-Improve is an automated testing tool, but if you're using something like the Wave toolbar, Lighthouse, most of those tools are going to be referring to parts of the WCAG standard when they're explaining to you the problems that are being found. And then, like I said, it is the standard most accessibility statements, VPATs, policies, they're all organized and usually refer to the WCAG criteria. So as a little bit of a background, the definition of WCAG, like I said, is Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. They are maintained by the Web Accessibility Initiative, which is a group of people. They are the Web Accessibility Initiative, WAI, are a subgroup under the W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium. It's the main international standards organization for the World Wide Web. So like it's the people who write the rules for HTML. It's founded in 1994, led by Sir Tim Berners-Lee. So it's really a consortium. It's made up of full-time staff and volunteers who work on the development of these standards, including WCAG. So the way WCAG is organized, the top level parts of WCAG are the 4 main principles, which I'll go through. Then under each of the principles are guidelines. There are 13 guidelines. Those are like the subheadings underneath principles. Then there are lots of different success criteria. Those are kind of like requirements and techniques. So based on the guidelines, there are often different ways to fulfill the guidelines, which I know this probably feels a little like squishy right now, but it'll make more sense once I actually show you the standard and walk you through one of them. But just remember that principles are the main top 4 things. Under those principles are guidelines, and then there are success criteria and techniques that help you make sure you are adhering to those guidelines. There is also this other level called conformance level. And this you might have heard like WCAG 2.1 AA or something like that. So WCAG 2.1 refers to the version of the standard. I think the most recent version is 2.2 or 2.3. They're currently working on WCAG 3.0. So that just tells you almost like an edition of a textbook, right? So like there have been 2.0 was like a very big revamp of the first version, WCAG 1.0. Then there have been small revisions and enhancements. So that would be like the equivalent of like a dot release 2.1, 2.2, et cetera. And if you, so that's the, if you hear WCAG 2.1 AA, the AA part is actually referring to that level of conformance. So the levels are single A, AA, and AAA. And these don't refer to like good, better, or best. They refer to the number of people who would be impacted by a change, as well as the cost or difficulty of the implementation. So level A's are usually, you're getting a big bang for your buck. They are criteria, the success criteria that are easier to implement and have a high impact on a wide variety of users. Double A is usually high impact, but sometimes only affect specific user populations. So for example, like something related to something for people only using a screen reader would benefit from it, but it's still a very high impact because it's like everyone who's using a screen reader would benefit. That might be something in a AA level. And AAA is usually more difficult or expensive to adhere to. The success criteria here are usually focused on improvements for specific user populations. I'll go through an example of like one guideline and the different success criteria if they are single A, AA, and AAA as an example later in the presentation. So I'm going to show you what the WCAG standard website looks like. So you can see over on the left that number one is that first principle of perceivable. And then there are those guidelines underneath perceivable. So the guidelines are like text alternatives, time-based media, adaptable, those kind of things. And I'm sorry, I did not turn my Slack notifications off. I apologize for that. So this is the way it looks. I will say, like I said, if you just go in here and start poking around, it is very overwhelming. I would ask you to keep in mind that the visual design is adding to some of that feeling of overwhelmingness. So I'm just going to show you, for example, I don't think WCAG is really any more complex than Google Material Design Standards, but just if you look at how they're laying it out with, you know, more differences in the size of the headings and like larger line heights and things like that, this just feels a lot easier, but it's really about the design. So just keep that in mind when you're using this. Once you get used to, you know, the visual design feeling a little bit overwhelming, the information is really, really useful and it is very well organized. All right, so those 4 big principles at the top, it's something that is referenced in other readings and videos for the class, but I just want to reiterate, they are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, and create this nice acronym of POUR, P-O-U-R. Perceivable means that all of the content is able to be consumed, whether that's read, listened to, reviewed in any way by anyone, no matter how they're choosing to access the page or what disabilities they may have. The second principle is operable, and this is very similar, but it is any of the interactions on the page are available no matter how the person is choosing to interact with the page. So if I am navigating a form and I'm using the keyboard, my expectation is when I press tab, I'll be going through right in the same order that the visual layout of the form is. So that's an example of operable. Another example of operable is like if I am, you know, choosing to use voice search and it, you know, it is offered, there shouldn't be any differences in how I'm able to operate the website versus, you know, someone using a mouse. The third principle here is understandable. This relates to the reading level of the page and also making sure that any errors that are occurring on the page are explained to people. Sometimes, especially with screen reader users, if you're filling out a form, you may, you know, if you skip like the phone number and you don't realize that phone is a required field and you can't submit the form without putting in your phone number, sometimes it'll say at the top, you know, phone number is a required field. Well, that information also needs to get read aloud to anyone using the screen reader. And I will say generally, if you are just making a basic HTML website, not doing anything fancy, if you follow the rules of HTML, you are golden for hitting all of these guidelines and criteria. It's when things get more complex, and they often get more complex when you're using, JavaScript libraries, you're using content management systems that like are layering functionality on functionality on functionality. It also becomes an issue if your code is older. But just like generally, if you were just to go make an HTML5 website from scratch, all of this is built in and it shouldn't break. It's when people sites become more complex, they become older, and people make significant adjustments to the design. Like, for instance, built in, if you just used HTML5 and you started hitting tab, it would automatically be keyboard accessible, right? Every link would get a focus indicator that would say like a blue outline around every link. But if you had a product owner say, well, I don't really like that blue thing that happens, can we hide that? Or like, can we make it a really light gray so most people don't see it? That's when it becomes problematic, right? That's when it needs someone like you to say something about, no, this is actually there for a reason. We don't want to disable it. We don't want to hide it, because people who are using the keyboard find it really useful, and it's very helpful. It helps create more inclusive, equitable websites. So that's understandable. And then robust is really focused on compatibility. So compatibility with different types of browsers, and also compatibility with different types of assistive technology. Again, all things that are generally built in if you're just using HTML5 out of the box, but become more problematic as code ages or as sites become more complex. So we're gonna look at this example. This is a article from the summer of 2018 from the New York Times. It's called "How to Make This the Summer of Missing Out." And then the subtitle here is "What's Happening? Who Cares? Meet Jomo, FOMO's benevolent younger cousin." And I'm going to kind of go through parts of this page and talk about the reasons why it is accessible based on when you go to the page, what it looks like and how it works. So first thing, if we think about the first guideline of perceivable, the title of this article, if you go to the New York Times website, is an H1 in HTML. So it's a heading level 1. This lets a person who is using a screen reader know that it is the overall topic of the page. So this becomes really important if you're using a screen reader and you have like a long page that has multiple headings, or especially like the homepage of the New York Times. You're going to have all of those. If you were to visually scan that page, you'd be able to pick out the headings very easily because they're larger font, they're bolder. But for someone who is listening to that content, a screen reader gives them the ability to navigate via headings. So if you don't mark those up in HTML as headings, they're losing that ability. So like if this text right here, "How to Make This the Summer of Missing Out," was just written with CSS to be larger font and bolder, you're losing out on that meaning of the H1 that is very critical for someone using a screen reader. So that's why it's important to use headings appropriately to make the content more perceivable to as many people as possible. The second guideline and example here is operable. So in this, I can use the keyboard to access the article and also use the keyboard for adding comments to the article, which is the main part of how you can interact. So you can go in and you don't need to use the mouse. You can just use tab and enter and the keyboard to type in your content, comments, submit them, and reply to the comments of other people. Third is understandable. One of the things with understandable is you want to make sure you are using plain language, no jargon, and you are defining any acronyms. So right in the top of the article, they define the acronyms FOMO and JOMO. So FOMO, the fear of missing out, and JOMO, the joy of missing out. And robust. So for this one, this page works really well, both on newer computers, newer browsers, as well as like old iPhones. So like if I went to this website on my old iPhone, smaller screen, I can still read everything. I can still use all the functionality, even though the size is very, very different and it's an older browser. All right, so we're going to go through now. So that's a very clear example of a couple of the different guidelines in action on this page. I will say the New York Times generally does a great job with accessibility. If you're looking like how to do something, I think the New York Times often has great examples. They often also write in their like staff blogs about how they are making things more accessible and inclusive. So they do a good job. So next I'm going to break down every principle here. So I went through them quickly before about what they mean generally, but now I'm going to go through the guidelines that are under each principle. So that first one is perceivable. It means that all content, no matter what the form, is available to be consumed by any user, and it shouldn't matter how they're accessing it. So the guidelines under this one are text alternatives. This is the one I would say the majority of people who work on websites are familiar with, the idea of having alt text, but also it's the idea of making sure you have for 1.2 for time-based media like video, audio, those kind of things, that you have captions, transcripts, audio descriptions. Usually for video, in order for it to be considered accessible, you need to have either captions or a transcript. Captions are much more flexible because they benefit such a wide range of user types, but transcripts are often easier to create. So there's kind of a, you need to really know your user population and decide what resources you have. I will say there are lots of options for auto-generating captions, especially if you're using something like YouTube, it will auto-generate captions. And now even in Zoom, you can auto-generate captions. They're pretty good. The technology is getting better, but to be compliant with the law and the guidelines, you need to have some kind of human intervention that is either editing or checking the auto-generated captions. One trick I learned a while ago that's super useful is like if you use your phone, like if you have an iPhone and Android and you use the voice recognition, you can kind of make a quick and dirty transcript of something just by like playing it out and turning on the voice recording feature on your phone, and then it'll like type out the words for you, and then you can edit that. So there's lots of little tricks and hacks to get you to like, to start from something. So you're not just starting from scratch of like typing something out. Also, if you're doing any teaching or things like that, having a script and then using the script to generate your captions is a great way to go. 1.3 is adaptable. So this means that content can be created, or any content can be presented in different ways without losing information or structure. Like for instance, if someone chose to like turn off all the CSS and just wanted the text of the page, you should still be able to read through and distinguish headings and be able to see the content in a way that makes sense. It shouldn't lose meaning if someone decided to like turn off CSS and JavaScript, for example. And then finally, distinguishable. So this is about making it easier for users to see and hear content that is like content that's in the foreground versus the background. So one of the things that comes up a lot that's in this particular guideline is not using color alone to indicate a link. Because for that, it means that, anyone who has issues seeing color, is colorblind, might not realize that the text is a link. And so it's a good idea to use two different ways to change the format. So for us on our website, we use the color changes, but then also the font face changes. So usually it's like a serif text. Our website, it changes to blue and bold. So not just changing it to blue. And I will also say, usually the default is like to have it underlined, but that is not your only option. It is flexible, and that there's different ways to fulfill that distinguishable guideline. So the next one is operable. So operable, like I said before, is really about, can anyone operate the content? Can they interact using whatever method they want? So they can use the keyboard, they can use the mouse. And they shouldn't lose any functionality if they're choosing to operate the content in a way other than like the mouse. So the guidelines here are keyboard accessible. This is a huge one, and it is probably the one that is easiest to test. It doesn't require any special software. You could pause this video right now, go to your own website or go to the Brandeis website and just start using the tab button on your keyboard and see if you see a focus indicator, if the order of focus, follows the visual order of the page. It's a really great way to just try out testing. And something we'll do for assignment 3 is a keyboard testing assignment. Second here is enough time. This is important for enough time to complete activities, or enough time to like stop videos or things like that. And that leads into 2.3 to make sure any of your animations or video content are not going to cause seizures or physical reactions. And in the documentation, there are more specifics around like frame rate and things like that that give you great information about what you want to avoid related to that. So 2.4 is navigable, making sure you can navigate through the site no matter how you're choosing to interact with it. And the last one here is input modalities. So this is thinking about being able to operate, by voice or by head pointer, eye gaze. Now there's potential for doing that as well. So this gets into all of those input modalities, and that's kind of a newer area for WCAG. So the third one here is understandable. This really goes along to think about like plain language guidelines, making sure that it is readable and by most people. And there is also 3.2, which is predictable, letting the user know when something is going to happen. So for instance, if I'm listening to a screen reader and I come up on a search box, it should let me know that it is waiting for me to type something in. So there's that prompt. And again, if you just were to create a bare bones search box in HTML, it would have that all built in. It's when things get a little fancier, a little more complex, that sometimes that functionality gets lost. And then third here is input assistance. This is what I mentioned before. If you have a form and you have forgotten, or someone fills out a form and they've made a mistake, making sure that input assistance of like, hey, this is actually a required field, is being read to the person, is easily viewed, so you're not losing it if, for example, you were choosing to use a screen reader. And the last one here is robust, and this goes along with, so the guideline under here is compatible. So making sure you have current and past browser support. And I think, many companies, organizations, not all of our websites work on, super old versions of Internet Explorer or like things like that. And I think that is okay. I think it's really knowing your audience, like looking, if you have analytics, looking at those, and making sure if you do have certain browsers that aren't supported, that it states that clearly on your website, and that it is not just, someone who's using a screen reader is at a disservice or something like that. I also think it's important, if you know sort of a barrier that might exist related to compatibility, that if you make it very clear about how someone could get in touch with the site admin or someone else to access the content, I think that that's an okay solution. I know sometimes you can't always, based on resourcing, you can't always support every single browser, but just making it clear that it's based on resourcing and that you're not actively excluding people from accessing your content. Also making sure that it works with a variety of assistive technology. And just know, so JAWS is still a very popular screen reader. It is decreasing in popularity over the last year or two based on a survey of screen reader users that the organization WebAIM does every year. But JAWS users most often are taught to use JAWS with Internet Explorer or whatever the newest version of the Microsoft browser is, because JAWS is a Windows system. All right, so those are the the 4 principles and then the guidelines that are underneath. So now if we go back to that WCAG quick reference, hopefully it is a little bit less overwhelming, because you can kind of see how, the guidelines like 1.1, 1.2 relate up to the principles. I also wanted to just show, if we highlight sort of, I made sort of everything fade away except the left nav here, which is the perceivable operable, understandable, robust if you scroll down. And then over on the right, you can see that first principle, perceivable, and then the guidelines are in blue underneath. So that kind of helps you, I feel like, hopefully feel a little less overwhelmed when you're going in here and using the WCAG criteria. So now that we've gone through sort of the principles and the guidelines, I want to talk a little bit more about those conformance levels that I mentioned. So each of the guidelines and the requirements underneath have an associated conformance level. So like I mentioned, if you have heard the phrase like WCAG 2.1 AA, everything has to be at that conformance level, it means that anything that is single A or AA, as noted in the WCAG criteria, needs to be included. Basically, single A, like these are all inclusive. So like single A is everything that is single A. AA is everything that is marked as AA and everything that is single A. AAA is everything that is single A, everything that is AA, and everything that is AAA. AAA, it's really uncommon to see a policy or a company that's like, we are compliant with AAA, because many of the criteria that are marked as AAA are for very specific smaller user groups. And also you start to have to really make affordances to your design choices when you start doing AAA. So even like for government websites, which I would say are like held to a higher standard for compliance with WCAG, those are usually need to be compliant with AA, not AAA. AAA is like for one of the, you know, some of those more specific features, like for instance, reaching every kind of person with a visual disability. So like not including certain colors at all, or like you're really limiting what colors you can use on your website sometimes by complying with AAA. But it can be helpful to still look at the AAA options if you know, for instance, that some of your users or many of your users are blind, low vision, have or have other visual disabilities. So for somewhere like the Perkins School for the Blind, right? They probably have more compliance with AAA than other places because they know a higher population of the people using the Perkins website are going to have visual disabilities. So just keep that in mind. Like I said, the usual, I would say the standard that most places have is WCAG 2.1 or WCAG 2.2 AA. But there is some helpful information and helpful guidelines in AAA. So again, single A is going to be the easiest level to achieve. There are multiple things that are single A in the guidelines and the criteria when you dig in. It's going to improve accessibility for the most sites and make it easier for browsing, navigating the site, translating the content. But it's still, I would say, the basic. And these issues are going to impact the greatest number of people with a variety of disabilities. So for AA, this level makes the content accessible to people with a wider range of disabilities by providing guidance on elements like color contrast and error identification. Usually, like I said before, regulators are going to prefer this level, and these issues may only impact one group of users, but it is usually a large group of users. For instance, you know, people using a screen reader. And then AAA is going to be the highest level of compliance, and it makes content accessible to the widest range of people, but it can significantly alter the design of the site. And it's not always possible to conform. And it is also possible that the issues that are called out in AAA are only impacting a very small number of people that could otherwise be served by presenting an alternative, for instance. So just, you know, serving the content in two different ways, and people can kind of choose which one they prefer. And also when you offer those kind of options, that you're not making it like, well, if you were a screen reader user, go over here. It should be like everyone can choose, like, do you want to look through the data visualization, or do you want to read a 2-page article that describes the data visualization, right? So some people may just prefer one or the other, but also gives more options for people with disabilities as well. All right, so this is a little animated GIF that goes over, you can kind of see all it is an animated GIF of the John James Audubon collection page on the Harvard Library website. So we have a collection of drawings and letters and really cool stuff related to Audubon. So you'll see, I just kind of made this GIF of myself tabbing through the page. So you'll see the little blue focus indicator that goes across the top. And I'm going to walk through 3 different parts of this and how they're related to single A, double A, and triple A conformance. So the first thing, we are, if you think of the world of WCAG, that outline format, the GIF you're seeing and what I'm going to describe is part of the principle of operable, so number 2, and then the guideline navigable, so 2.4. And the 3 things that are illustrated by this are 1, the focus order, 2, focus visible, and 3, location. So focus order, that means this is a single A issue. It means that the order of the keyboard focus, so as you are tabbing through the links, the order of the keyboard focus follows the visual order of the interactive elements on the page. So for example, when I tab through, you tab over help with, then visit, then collections and exhibits, then about. You're not jumping from like help with over to ask down to a link on the page, right? It's following that visual order. This is really important for keyboard users, screen reader users, and magnification software users. Large groups of people, different kinds of assistive tech in use. The second part of this is going to be the focus visible. So as I'm tabbing through, you can also see around each link, as you tab over it, there is a blue outline that shows up around each link. So it's important for keyboard users, but someone who is completely blind is not going to be helped by this visual focus indicator, right? So that is an example of a double A criteria because it's a smaller group of people, but it's still a pretty big group of people. So people who, do not have a visual disability, but maybe have a mobility disability or are using the keyboard short term because they broke their wrist or something like that. So that blue outline is an example of a double A criteria. And the third criterion is location. So this is helpful for people who may have a short attention span, who may be confused when following a long series of links or navigation steps to a web page. And it's also helpful when a user follows a link directly to the web page, like from Google. So like if I was in Google and I typed in John James Audubon Houghton Library and came to this page, it is helpful to understand like where this page sits within the context of the entire site. So the way we are fulfilling this location criteria is through right above the main heading of John James Audubon Collection, you'll see the breadcrumb links of home/collection. Another way of fulfilling this criteria would be to have some kind of sitemap that the person could access via a footer or something like that. So this is going to, again, serve users who perhaps have some cognitive disabilities, or short attention span, have issues following long steps, things like that. So this is an example of a AAA criteria. All right, so that is an example with the GIF of the 3 different conformance levels that sit underneath the principle of operable and the guideline of navigable. So just to sum up, so the single A one is 2.4.3 focus order. The double A one is 2.4.7 focus visible, and the triple A one is 2.4.8 location. I'm going to mute myself. Hold on. Sorry about that. We have 2 airfields near my home and often have low-flying planes around. All right, so that is the overview of WCAG, sort of step-by-step breaking it down, the different parts, and how it's organized in the conformance level. Lastly, I'm just going to go over these easy checks. We're going to get into testing in the next couple of weeks, but this is just really a place to start. And these are also described by the Web Accessibility Initiative. It's on the W3C website. It's just like preliminary checks. So here we go. So the first one is testing keyboard access and visual focus. Similar to what I just showed on the John James Audubon page, how does your website behave when you're using the keyboard? Second is alt text for images. Third is checking forms, labels, and errors. Fourth is contrast ratio. So this is something that is very easily testable via like a Chrome extension like Siteimprove or like the Wave toolbar. Just that's something, you know, it's just going to check your background color versus your foreground color and things like that. A structure check, making sure you're using, you know, things are laid out appropriately. And that goes with the next one of making sure you're using headings appropriately, making sure you're not underusing or overusing headings, and making sure that things are coded as headings when they appear as headings on the page. You're not just using CSS to make them look larger. All right, so a couple of ways to check the structure is to, within your browser, you can turn off the images and show the text alternatives. You can also turn off style sheets and linearize the page. And there's a couple of different toolbars. A lot of times, especially like in Chrome and Firefox, it's built into the browser, some of these tools. So those are ways to just, even without special software, just checking some of these initial things. Next is making sure your page title matches the content on the page. Seems like a no-brainer, but sometimes can be overlooked. So you can see that page title on my page right here appears on the tab, WCAG Basics presentation, and then it tells me that I'm in Google Slides. This is something it should also change as your page changes. So if you're in a website and say it says like Brandeis homepage, and then you go to the alumni page and it still says Brandeis homepage, and then you go to the, you know, financial aid page and it still says Brandeis homepage, that means there's something wrong with your page title. Your page title should reflect the page you're on, and not just, you know, the single name of the whole site. Another thing you can do is use you know, Control plus or Control minus, Command plus, Command minus if you're on a Mac, to just resize the text. And you should make sure two things: that you're not losing any content when you resize the text, and the site doesn't force you to do any horizontal scrolling. Horizontal scrolling puts a lot more cognitive load on someone. And if someone chooses to make the content bigger, they should not have to do extra work. And the final two relate to media. So checking that any animation or moving content, that you can stop it. If possible, not auto playing is also a good option. And then finally, making sure any of your multimedia has alternatives like transcripts, captions, or audio description. All right, and that's it for this basics of WCAG. Please go and refer to this slide deck as much as you need. And if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. Thanks.